So everyone deserves to have fun. Fun can be cathartic, it can be healing, and we're all humans, we deserve that. Everyone deserves to have fun, and if this statement is a mission for the gaming industry to realize its full potential, it's one that's rapidly rising to the surface as technology quickly advances, and more people have access to that technology and look to it for entertainment, and specifically to play games. It challenges us as an industry to think beyond players as a group and think about each as an individual and what we can do to provide a gaming experience that speaks to them. At Big Fish Games, with our diverse portfolio of content, we're really able to watch these patterns evolve. We have 15 years, we just celebrated our 15th anniversary, so we have 15 years of experience in creating games. We started with a focus on PC, Mac, casual games, but that's grown to today's diverse portfolio. We offer games with different business models, so we offer premium, subscription, and free-to-play. We offer games across different platforms, so on mobile, on desktop, and now VR. And we also offer games across various genres, including casual, social casino, and midcore. This allows us a great perspective. We're both a developer and a publisher, and we bring our passion and our talents in game distribution, production, marketing, and design, and our data-driven, rational approach to creating a successful and growing games business. With this, we're able to understand player trends across platform, across business model, across types of game, across genres, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing. 2.6 billion, that's a really big number, and I didn't abbreviate it on the slide for a reason, because I think it's so easy for us to get numb to how huge a number that is. You know, we think of a billion, it's kind of quick to say, you think of, okay, McDonald's serves a couple billion people, but 2.6 billion is actually 34% of the estimated global population in 2017. And to bring it up more on a local scale, it's 684 times the greater Seattle metropolitan area where we stand today. It's also the number of mobile gamers, according to Unity's Q1 2017 estimates, which is a huge, massive audience. What a total addressable market, right, if you're trying to create a games business. But how do you even think to wrap your arms around this? If you want to do something and knowing your audience is rule number one, how do you even begin to break this down into something that you can digest? We often start with demographics, right? Country, gender, age, income. Maybe you have some outsized interest or hobby data. Maybe you understand the genre of game they're playing now. You know, we can start with some simple things, but as you start to slice and dice it, it gets quickly complex. And I would challenge you, is this even really the best way to go about it? Because at the end of the day, you could have two people with the exact same demographic profile who react completely differently and have different behavior within your game. So how useful is this really anyway? I'd say if you really want to build a successful games business, you need to start by recognizing players as individuals, and specifically your players. Because 2.6 billion and growing is a massive opportunity, but we need to understand and meet people where they're at, instead of bringing them back up to these large groups. But getting there isn't a straight line, but I think as you start to progress, there are different stages that you'll go through as you start to understand the individual on a more, or the player on a more individual basis. The first one is demographics, right? So we talked about this. It's what you see sort of a lot of rolled up data in. From that, you can move to behavioral snapshots, which gives you a view into a user's behavior within your game. And then finally, personalized predictions. But let's start with demographics. So who are the match 3 players in this audience, or in this picture, right? If we think about a match 3 player and we think about it from a demographic standpoint, match 3 player is a woman age 35. That can start to feel a little bit anonymous. And it also hides the diversity of match 3 players. This can also lead to some wrong assumptions. So if you have this understanding, woman age 35, maybe you want to have a more nuanced understanding of who a match 3 player is. You can start to break that down. So this percentage are younger, this percentage are older, this percentage are actually male. But in reality, I see time and time again that we end up rolling those stats back up to the average or the majority. And what does that really tell us about this person? And it can lead, if taken wrongly, to some wrong assumptions about who they are that can lead us to market with generalizations or stereotypes that end up alienating a large part of the audience who doesn't fit within this model. If we look at players in their individual, we'll start to see a more nuanced story. And I think that this is important because we look at, when we look at players, we can start to think about how to address them. So some of them might fit that model, but there are others that don't. And we want to be able to think in a more broad and more holistic way. And the reason that this is important is demographics, while they can be useful in giving us broad trends and categories and helping us see things at a very high level, they really don't tell us a lot about why we make the decisions that we do. So this stat here, on average, across product categories, less than 2% of brand choice is explained by demographics. And I think this is pretty true for most of our choices, right? Demographics, if we're thinking about a world audience, a global audience, we know that cultural definitions of things like gender continue to evolve. So we know that a woman, age 35, may look very different country to country, and it doesn't tell us a lot. So we really need to be careful and specific when we use demographics about why we use them, what they get us, and what the limitations are. The next way we can start to look at our players is through behavioral snapshots. And this is something that I think is pretty common across most every game now, where you start to look at some level of gameplay data within your title. One of the really general and one of the most common ways that we do this is we pick a KPI, and we started with binary KPIs like payer and non-payer, and we'd start to look at and group players within our games within these categories. We evolved that so you can have a single KPI that then can create multiple segments, like LTVs. So we could take this notion of a pair and start to break it down by the LTV of that pair in our game. And that might give us a little bit more specificity in how we address different segments within our audience. At Big Fish Casino, the VIP tiers is a very important part of the way that we market our games. But it also has its limitations, because you're looking at behavior or a snapshot or a ranking of a user at a specific moment in time, whenever you're pulling that data to run that segment or message that user. But people don't exist in a single snapshot in time, right? We continue to evolve as we go. And when you start to look at these sorts of behavioral snapshots and you start to piece them together, you'll see a very different story. So for instance, you could take 2 players that have an LTV of $100 and look at that over time, and you'll see something very different. One player may have purchased 50 times, $2 purchases 50 times over 3 years, where another player purchased 5 $20 purchases within the last 2 weeks. Once you start to add in that dimension of time, you see that these are really 2 completely different players with different behavior and characteristics, and they deserve to be addressed differently. The next way that we can kind of understand players in our games is to think about their motivations or different styles of play. And we've recognized these for a long period of time. So this up here is Bartles player types, which was released in 1996, when Bartles looked at players in the MMORPG and MUD, which is multi-user dungeon world, which were big games at that point, network computer games on terminals, mostly text-based. Anyone here remember them? All right, just a couple people. But he looked and seeing players within these worlds, he really recognized different patterns of gameplays and started to surface them. And we really started to talk about different types of players, even though they were in the same game and maybe shared the same demographics. They were really different players. Quantic Foundry has taken this a step further, and I think this is a model that's worth checking out. This is their gamer motivation model. It's based on a survey of 300,000 gamers who report what motivates them and what they enjoy in their gameplay. It's self-reported, so there are some limitations. Like, we don't always actually do what we say we're going to do, right? But I think it does at least give us a more nuanced way of understanding how different people in their diversity approach games and how we can think about that and start to break that down. You can also, and they do a great job on their website of taking some of these and slicing it by different demographic categories, and you can start to get a little bit more appreciation for the diversity of play throughout the world. One interesting thing is that regardless of how you slice it by age or gender, completion and fantasy are always in the top 5. So apparently we all really like to check the box sometimes and pretend to be someone or somewhere else. I think, though, one of the challenges of looking at this is that you're still looking at a player's behavior at a snapshot in time, right? So maybe I'm motivated by completion today, but that doesn't mean that I was always motivated by completion. I may have, been in a different place earlier in my life, and I may move to a different place later on. With game development cycles taking, taking months to years to make a game, and production values continuing to grow, really the holy grail of kind of understanding how players evolve over time and what that might do to help us predict where they're going to be so we can place our best bets there, I think is where we would really want to start to drive towards. I also think that we're talking here about motivations, but really we're talking about in-game behaviors and stuff that you see represented. So I think there's also additional layers deeper here, and we can really continue to evolve our understanding of who our players are and what drives them to be motivated by challenge completion, and do a better job with that understanding and how to address them. So to give you an example of how you see a more nuanced view, if you look at a single player's behavior over time across games, you really start to see how people evolve, and maybe you can see some trends or not if you looked at it on a global scale. But just to illustrate this, here are some of the games that I've played. Obviously not every game that I've played, but some that I really was taken with over the course of my life. So some of them I totally fit the demographic profile when I played now or when I played them in my past. Some may surprise you. If anyone actually played a MUD called Marches of Anton in 1996, you should come talk to me because I'd love to know. But there's a big diversity here, and I think when I look at myself and my motivations, they've really changed over time. So I used to, in high school, spend all my time in MMORPGs and really exploring the possibilities of imagination. But now I'm much more motivated to play short, kind of casual puzzle games, things that are quick brain challenges. I never thought myself a crossword puzzle player until I started playing the New York Times crossword puzzle app. And it's now one of my favorite things to do. So we all change over time, and some of this has to do with just the way our lives evolve as we get older, but I think it starts to be informative to look at all these different ways that we slice our players over time. And that leads us to also knowing that our players don't fit into sort of categories, and we see these trends evolving and these lines blurring over time as well. So we ran a survey at Big Fish to understand crossover between genres. And I think that in the industry, we think of an RPG player, and we think of like a match 3 puzzle player, and never the two shall meet. But in reality, there's a lot of crossover in our players' lives. People who listed RPG as their favorite genre, 61% of them say they also play puzzle games on their phones or tablets. And 24% of those players, of the total RPG players, specifically play match 3 games. And I think this is really informative because it can lead us to think about new game opportunities or cross-promotional opportunities as we start to understand the nuance of these players. So some people, why do they cross over? Some people report that they play RPGs for sort of the skill and the strategy, but they like to get into match 3s to relax and step away from it all. But other players prefer them together, and we've seen more and more mid-core games that have match 3 mechanics at their core. So it's interesting to recognize these crossovers. At Big Fish, we know that cross-promotion can have a meaningful impact on our business, and so we look for opportunities to bring players, our network of players, across different games and help them share the games. But you have to be careful with this too, right? Because if it's only 24% of the RPG players that play Match 3, you don't want to blanket Match 3 messaging to all your RPG players. You might turn some of them off. And this is where we get to personalized predictions or personalized messaging. So this is really taking, now that we kind of know the limitations of averages and demographics and looking at a user in a specific snapshot of time, this is where we really take that notion and we start to look at those pieces over a longer period of time. So we not only know sort of how things have evolved, but we can use that to predict where they might go. If this seems complex, don't worry, AI is here to help. Jay Inslee was speaking earlier today and talking about Seattle being a fantastic center for the advancement of AI research, so this is a great place to be. But really, we're seeing trends in machine learning, big data processing, and AI helping us to make sense of the millions and millions and terabytes of data and look for these patterns to help us form these predictions. And I think this is going to be a really interesting and important part of our business going forward. There's a good example of this that was a case study published by Cloudera and Wargaming about World of Tanks. And they are talking about being able to take the behavioral data from World of Tanks players and put it into machine learning and game personalization or game recommendation and communication platform that they built, and being able to use this iteratively to understand what's the next thing that that player might want to do and what's the next action they might want to take. And by doing this, they're able to send messages to the user at the right time about what they wanted to do, and that increased their customer engagement. But I think what's really interesting about this study is not only did it increase their customer engagement, it also increased the amount of messages that their platform, their publishing team, was able to send to customers by 10 times. So you can't blanket message your whole user base with a message because you might cause churn. But here they're able to increase engagement and do that by increasing their customer touch points and their loyalty because they're understanding a player at their moment of time, who they are, and being able to predict what message is relevant for them. So this is a really powerful way that you can continue to improve your marketing, improve the way that you continue to maintain and run live ops in your game. And it's really targeting the right customers in their specific individuals that allows for this to happen. I think the other interesting application of machine learning and AI and this big data processing is in game tuning. So games are incredibly complex systems, and they're only growing more so. And each game is a combination of great preparation, great execution, but it has an intangible factor, kind of like the movie industry. The games industry, we call it a fun factor, but it's something that breathes the heartbeat into the game, that gives it a life that's beyond just polished graphics or running well on a mobile phone. And this heartbeat really has to do with being able to provide a play experience that's fun and engaging for your users, that meets their skill level with where they're at, and that keeps them engaged and playing over the long term. And being able to use machine learning and AI for this is a really interesting application, and we're seeing more and more instances of dynamic tuning and dynamic difficulty in the market. And one of the reasons why this is important, so if you remember back to school and you had that teacher that, or the subject that was super challenging and maybe the teacher was really strict and you would just feel really anxious and it was really hard to get into that subject because you were just overwhelmed by that anxiety of the situation. It was a little bit beyond where you were at. Or on the other hand, you'd have that subject that was easy or that teacher that was just super boring and you would really struggle to get through the class on that side of it because it was really just hard to pay attention. Studies show that the most effective teachers are the ones who teach to the individuals in their classrooms, who are really able to make the subject a little bit harder or a little bit easier depending on where their students are. And those teachers are really looking to keep the student in that flow state that keeps them engaged with the content and provides enough challenge that they're engaged and they're in it and they're learning, but they're not having the anxiety on one end, and they're not having the boredom on the other end. And this is something, ultimately, that we're trying to do with game experiences as well. So we see that, we can actually make levels harder, as we saw in our Fairway Solitaire game, and improve player retention, because you need to find this right balance. I'm seeing a lot of applications of dynamic difficulty in the market right now. This quote is from an EA paper that was written by a couple people at EA about a system that they were building for dynamic difficulty. And you just have to go to the related work section of the paper to see all the different attempts or all the different applications and different strategies and ways that people have approached this problem. But I've seen it range from games who tune differently for different geographic regions or countries. So as we know from demographics, this is a pretty broad generalization of a way to look at a player's skill, to games that really tune based on the individual level. So our recent hit game that we just launched about a month ago, Cooking Craze, which is now in the top 80 and on iPhone this morning, it has a dynamic difficulty system that looks at your individual play patterns and will adjust the level difficulty as you go through the game over time. So it's not only looking at a snapshot of your behavior, but it's constantly continuing to adjust and provide you with the right experience to keep you engaged and moving forward. So now that we've got big data, we've got machine learning, and we've got AI, and it's all going to dynamically create the right situations for our games, what's next? So now that this is all down to a science, what's left for us to do? Do we just kind of tinker a little bit, set it, forget it, maybe look at a report, make a couple tunings? No, I think this is, as we get better and better at providing these individual experiences, leveraging the power of AI, leveraging machine learning, and the ability to really create these unique individual experiences within our games, it challenges us as game makers to take a step back and a step above this and think about creating a diversity of content that really speaks to the diversity of people in the world and the way that they might want to play and to consume those games. And it's with this in mind that I'm really excited to announce Big Fish Premium. So we've long recognized that on mobile, the paid category, it can be really hard for consumers who prefer paid games to find a next great game that they want to play. So we recognize the opportunity to offer a subscription service that allows game players to find new games, and with that subscription, they can unlock one game a month and purchase additional games at a discount. This is coming to iOS, and it's really offering that brings us back to our roots on PC, Mac, and it's one that we're really excited to bring to mobile. Thank you. And speaking of getting back to our roots, I'm also really excited that we're back here in Seattle. So thanks to Jessica and the Casual Connect team for bringing this back here. It's awesome to be back in a city that I love and a city that's so important to Big Fish. We are very committed to Seattle. We're actually going to open an office next year just a couple blocks away from here that we're really excited about. And I think that we're in this amazing epicenter for bringing together the trends in AI, all the big data, the cloud services, everything that's going on, having it converge in games, and really being able to shape, the next decades in gaming. And I think that one thing that really excites me about the future is knowing that beyond all that technology, what creates the heart and soul of the game is the passionate team that's making that game. And that's what makes me excited to stay in the games industry and excited to be at Big Fish. So at Big Fish, we know that passion is super important to what we do. And we know that passion could be as diverse as the players who play our games. So if you have passion, whether it be in game design or engineering or accounting, we're really, we offer you to come check us out. Because we love passionate people. And we know that passion comes from individuals, and that passion is going to be as individualistic as the people who play our games. And that's what brings me back to, in the game industry, everyone deserves to have fun. Thank you.
So you have an awful lot of data about sort of the customers. I'm curious, are the typical big fish players serially monogamous in terms of do they play a game to completion then churn to another one, or do they have a portfolio of games that they sort of rattle around backwards and forwards between?
Well, we have such a diverse portfolio, it can really depend on the type of game player, right? So in our hidden object adventure games, we really see that players will consume an entire game and then they go on to the next game and the next game. And some of our free-to-play games, players will play them for many years. So we have Big Fish Casino and Fairway Solitaire that have really been around for 6+ years and are continuing to be kind of chart topper hits, and we've had players in those games for that long. So it can really depend on the player's preferences, but we continually, look to expose our players to our network of games.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk. It was great. I'm going to be a negative Nancy on you here and ask, what about, I don't know how Big Fish, if they have big community games, but how do they handle griefers, toxicity, and how do they handle those people when that's how they have fun?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the world's a diverse place, right? So there's always a little bit of that balancing. We do have community games. Big Fish Casino, for instance, is a synchronous social multiplayer game. So we have the ability for players to interact with each other during playing the game. I think the way that we look at it is we try to create an environment for everyone to feel safe and enjoy themselves, and so we'll look at a particular player's behavior and try to address it with that player on an individual level, but at the end of the day we do have certain guidelines that we need them to follow.
Thank you.
Yep.
So in terms of the size of your audience, when Big Fish first started, were paid downloads, but now you're moving to also free to play. Would you like to describe to the audience roughly how much of your revenue comes from paid downloads and how much is from the free to play model?
I won't get into the revenue numbers, but we continue to have a very strong and healthy business on the premium side, and then free-to-play has continued to grow. So free-to-play is now over half of our business, but we have strengths in both areas.
Okay, and we can release you 5 minutes early. Please stay around. A round of applause, first of all, Carey. People spend a lot of time creating presentations, so thank you very much.